Our main character is with his dad at home watching a sports game, during which his father begins to have a stroke. After calling 911, he sees a strange creature, causing him to drop the phone. The creature comes face to face with the protagonist, then to his surprise, it speaks. It tells him that it can save his dad's life, in exchange for someone else's. The protagonist tells this creature about a high school bully, Walter Flanagan. The MC agrees to have this creature kill Walter in exchange for his dad's life. After being told the creature's true name, to which the protagonist renames him the Pastel Man to spare us the knowledge, keeping the reader from being able to summon the creature themselves. The Pastel Man then takes an insect from a satchel it carries and places it in the father's throat. This being the Pastel Man's method of healing people or killing them. After the being disappears, the ambulance takes his dad to the hospital, and the protagonist stays with him for some time. He finally leaves to confront Walter. After arriving at a party he knew Walter was at and following his car after he leaves, the protagonist runs Walter off the road. Stumbling from the wreck, Walter approaches the main character to beat him, but not before the MC calls out for the Pastel Man, which soon arrives, scaring Walter away. The Pastel Man pounces him, toying with and gutting him. The Pastel Man then forces one of its insects down Walter's throat, causing him to gag and suffocate. With the deed being complete, the Pastel Man disappears from the scene, leaving the protagonist standing in the road, traumatized and filled with regret. Walter's death is ruled as a drunk driving accident. The years go by, the MC being approached by the Pastel Man many more times to try and strike a deal to save a loved one who was dying at the time, which the main character is able to refuse. That is, until sometime later in his life, when his wife and son are involved in a car accident. A drunk driver crashed into the taxi the two were in, the wife having been killed already. However, his son was still alive, but presumably in critical condition. The MC is tempted into a deal, agreeing to let the Pastel Man kill the drunk driver to save his son. Arriving at the hospital, the protagonist has the Pastel Man save his son first, then making his way to the driver who is also being treated at the same hospital. After entering the room, he sees that the drunk driver was a boy, no older than Walter at the beginning of the story. The MC has a moment of reflection, determining that the boy didn't deserve to die for this mistake, not wanting him to suffer the same fate as Walter. The MC resigns himself next to his son, watching the sunrise while waiting for the Pastel Man to take him instead of the drunk driver. The biggest question is, what is the Pastel Man? In the story, the main character asks if the Pastel Man is death, to which it denies, as well as turning down the idea that it is the devil, stating that it is more of an independent contractor. I speculate that the Pastel Man is still some kind of demon or similar type of being, such as Beelzebub, given the name Lord of the Flies, though that refers to his ability to fly rather than the bug. But the Pastel Man's use of insects to kill or heal people might be a literal interpretation of that title. If a figure like the Pastel Man exists in a religion or belief set, feel free to comment below. I'd be interested to hear about it. It's possible that the Pastel Man is an alien, but I doubt that. Maybe an interdimensional creature which has access to the realm of the soul and able to interact with it, Not necessarily a demon depending on what types of fantasy or science fiction you know of, but when I think of aliens, I think of beings still constrained to our reality. Or it's entirely possible this is an original creature whose abilities are original as well. Speculating what the Pastel Man is far and wide, though I think its origins are less important than the overall plot of the story. It's the horror version of a coming-of-age story. The main character's relative innocence is brutally torn away from him after meeting the Pastel Man and witnessing Walter's death. It's also a story of temptation and redemption. It's entirely possible this story is a mutated version of Satan trying to tempt Jesus in the desert, but rather than the constant denial to give in by Jesus, our main character shows his human flaws and gives in. The redemption then comes in when he refuses the Pastel Man through the next few years. Then more temptation slips in, before the memory of Walter stops it in its tracks. The final redemption being the main character's sacrifice, atoning for his prior sin. My final thoughts on this story is that Pastel Man is a very nice breath of fresh air in the typical monster story in the creepypasta genre. Plot: monster story, but with an intelligent creature who isn't blindly murdering everyone, which some, including myself, will say makes him much more intimidating. Characters: 2 integral characters. The Pastel Man, an intelligent and charismatic creature that knows how to take advantage of people and their desperate times. The main character, who makes a deal with an insidious creature, but then is able to use the horrors of the experience with it to ultimately deny the Pastel Man later in his life. Themes: as stated, coming of age, temptation, and redemption. One might be able to derive a sexual connotation, given how the Pastel Man shoves an insect down the victim's throat. You don't need too much imagination to figure out what that could be. But I'm going to stick with the themes I stated before and leave this one to the Alien franchise to exploit. And Sigmund Freud.